Hi, in this video I want to demonstrate how you can use serverless functions and Graphcool's request pipeline to transform and validate the payload of a mutation before it gets written to the database. I therefore have created this customer type here, and now our goal is going to be that for every new customer that is going to be created, we want to make sure that the email address is valid and that the email address that is stored in the database only contains lowercase letters. We therefore can head over to the Functions tab and create a new function, and here we have to select the request pipeline, which is where we can implement validation and transformation of the mutation payload. We now have to select the trigger for our mutation, or rather the hook, where we want to hook in the function. And in our case, this is whenever a customer is created. This is when we want to call the function. We actually have to create two different functions. The first one is for transforming the payload, transforming the email address to only contain lowercase letters. That's what we're going to do right now. Then we'll also create a second function that is going to perform the data validation step to make sure that this is actually a valid email address. So let's go ahead and use the transform argument step here and define our function. Before we start with our implementation, let's quickly try to understand the setup here. So on the left side, we see the input, the structure of the input for our function that we see on the right. So this event object, or rather the data object that is inside the event object, will have exactly this shape of the customer input type that we see right here. So to print, for example, the name of the customer that is part of the event object, we could simply go ahead and use event.data.name, and this would print the name of the customer right here. We can also click the example event, and this would display precisely what I just mentioned. So here we see what this event object that is being passed into our function actually looks like. To transform our input and make sure that all the emails of the new customers will always have only lowercase letters, all we have to do is reassign the email address that is part of the event object right here, and assuring that it only has lowercase letters. So we are using the toLowercase function for that, which is available out of the box in JavaScript. And to make sure that this is actually right, let's also go ahead and do a test run where we are going to log the email before and after our transformation. You can do a test run if you click right here on this button, where you can also specify some sample input right here on the left side. So right now I'm just going to type some uppercase characters, click run, and now in the logs of the information that we get about that particular function execution right here, we see that the first logging statements printed a large ASD, and the second one a an uppercase ASD, and the second one a lowercase ASD. All right, so now that we validated that our function actually works with using a test run, we can save the function and try it out in a playground. So let's give the function name and save it right here. And now we can go and test our implementation by writing an actual mutation in the playground. So I'm going to write a mutation to create our first customer. We don't really care about the name, but we do care about the email address of this customer, because we want to make sure that this is going to end up being written in lowercase letters. So now if I send the mutation, I expect the payload of the mutation to actually return the email, so this string here in lowercase letters. And it seems that our function actually did its job. Before the email was stored into the database, we see that it has been transformed to only contain lowercase characters. And if we ask for the customer with this particular ID in a query and also ask for the email, we will also see that this is actually true, and this is written to the database in lowercase characters. So this is the transformation step. Let's now go and implement the validation step. For that, we have to add a second function. We're choosing the request pipeline again and the hook where a customer is created. but this time we're using the pre-write step instead of the transform argument step. And the pre-write step is what we usually use for data validation, as well as for calling third-party services. So for example, if you wanted to charge a user on Stripe, this is what you would do in the pre-write step right here. So now, let's now move on and implement our function. And we see that it works in the same way. On the left side, we've got the customer input, and then we've got the event that is being passed into our function. So we can now again access the email address and make sure that it's valid inside the event. So the way how this works is that we have to check whether the email address that is contained in the event is valid. So we have to add an if statement and somehow validate the email address in the event. So we could actually now go and write a regular expression that is validating the email for us. But what I want to do is I want to use an NPM module that is called validator. And in general, right here in the inline code editor in the Graphcool console, you're able to use NPM modules, but only if they're available on this website here. So you can check this website and you can type the name of the NPM package right here. And if it's available, then you can use it in our console. So here the package that I'm going to use is called validator. So let's go back to the editor and require it in our code. Now we've got access to this validator, and we can use it to validate the email address. It has a function that is called isEmail, and that's precisely what we're going to use. And if this function returns false, then we are returning an error with a custom message stating that the provided email is not a valid email. Let's give a name to the function and save it. And like before, let's test it in a playground. We can just use the mutation that we were using before, the create customer mutation right here. And this time we expect the error to be returned because this is not a valid email address. So our validator function should actually prevent this customer from being created. If I click the play button, we indeed see that we're getting an error back with the error message that we specified saying ASD is not a valid email. And if instead I would now go and say asd@gmail.com, this seems to be a valid email address. Now we see that this email address is actually being returned. And if we move to the data browser, we also see that this particular customer has been created. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed learning about serverless functions and the request pipeline. And if you have any questions, check out our documentation or join our growing community on Slack.